Hello everyone and welcome back to Bitwig Studio and Music Production. This is lesson 5.04, and in this lesson we're going to take a look at the E-Kick instrument that comes bundled with Bitwig Studio. But before we do that, I want you to think back to the introduction video where I defined sound design as being a whole lot more than just synthesizers, a whole lot more than just the generator, if you will. And I need you to really understand that. And I want you to really appreciate that so many of the things we've already done have been related to sound design. Even taking 10 samples, right, and playing them all at, let's just say as an example, we have 3 tracks or something. And if we play them all just as they defaulted are and we play them all back just straight ahead, all right, we haven't done any sound design. We're just playing 3 tracks. We've made creative choices as to what audio samples we want to use, but that's it. But the second we start to turn this fader down, yes, this is also mixing, but in a way it's sound design because we're changing that track. We're turning it down. That wasn't its original value. That wasn't its original level. And so in a way, we are sculpting, we are changing that sound. And we've taken it to extremes in section 2, 3, and 4. And we really have. We've done a number of different things with these sounds. And so I want you guys to all understand that you're already sound designers and that the generator, or in our case, these different instruments and these different synthesizers, that's just one element of sound design, and oftentimes it's the processing. And if we're working with samples and we're working with samplers, it's the acquisition of that sample. It's how we cut that sample up before dropping it in. Sound design is a really deep and multifaceted topic. And so don't think that because you may not understand everything there is to know about synthesis that you're not a sound designer, because if you've gone through this course in order, which I recommend you do, then you already are a sound designer in your own right. But now, instead of using just the built-in samples with Bitwig Studio, we're going to make a bit of a change up. We're going to start transitioning into the instruments that they give us. And the reason why I've held off, I should say, talking about the instruments and these devices is because you really needed to understand all of the audio effects and all of the different ways you could potentially process these things. It's really important to get in your head that processing is just as important as the synthesizing aspect in a lot of cases. If, for example, you just want to use these instruments in their default without any processing, you can absolutely do that. But a whole world is opened up when you start to also take these instruments and then do additional things with them. So right here you can see on our master track, I've just loaded in all of what Bitwig would refer to as the drum synthesizers. And we can see there's an E-kick, an E-tom, an E-clap, and these 3 are all very similar. We have a generator portion, and in the case of the E-clap, we have a noise portion here. We have some kind of modulator or envelope generator. Okay, in the case of the E-kick, it's just linked to a pitch mod. And then we also have a section for effects, velocity, sensitivity, and output. So these 3 guys are really related, but don't really think about it too much like that yet. We're really going to be focused on the timbres we can get out of these instruments. Then we have the E-snare and the E-hat, and these guys look incredibly intimidating right now, but trust me, when we get to them, it will all make sense. And when you look at any kind of instrument, whether it's the E-kick or it's the FM4 or it's the polysynth, I just want you guys to break it down. And Bitwig does a good job of separating different sections out for you. All right, so you can see oscillator 1, oscillator 2, noise, filter, and then here is kind of our mixer setting here all the way to the right with the output, the velocity, sensitivity, and then where we can nestle in effects. Okay, so I just wanted to show you guys these up front, and now we're going to talk specifically about the E-kick. And the first thing I'm going to mention, and I'm going to mention this every single time, is you need to go beyond the label and beyond the presets. A great thing to do is, of course, go in here and check out these different presets, and we'll do that first thing. So I'm going to go ahead and click caps lock so I can hear what's going on. And I think it's actually going to take us into the reds, which I don't know why they would have that set like that by default, but here it is. Yep. So be sure to pull this output down. I don't know why it does that. So hopefully you guys can hear that. It's not too low. You're going to probably want to wear headphones for portions of this video. So of course, to access our presets, we can pop this out and we can just flip through a bunch. And you'll notice how a lot of these have effects already built into them. And this one even goes a step further, putting the bit 8 and then nestling an additional EQ in there. And we can just go all the way through them like that. Now, the thing I want you to realize is that when we just did that, every single one of those was designed as a drum hit. Okay, and if you didn't know any better, you'd think all I can do is use the E-kick to make drum sounds. And you know what? You can use it to make drum sounds. That's what it's designed to do. But let's again think back to the first video and looking beyond the label. So just because this is called the E-kick doesn't mean that with some advanced processing or just some different forms of processing and resampling and bouncing and blah, 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 we can't get some really incredible things to come out of this original synthesizer and then go beyond that into our additional processing and doing all the things that we've already covered in this course. All right, and we'll talk more about that as we go through. But for now, let's just go ahead and take a look at how this all works. The first thing I'm going to do is go to my mixer setting. I'm just going to turn velocity sensitivity off for right now, and I'll pull back the output just a little bit. Next thing I want to do is take this pitch mod, and I'm just going to take the amount and pull it all the way down to 0. I'll take the decay of the pitch mod, and I'm also going to pull that all the way down to 0. So now all we're dealing with is the first section, the generator section. So this is where we're going to get our initial timbre from. And this is very easy. It's really cool that we've covered so many things already in this course because we're already familiar with things like decay and tune and tone, right? All we need to understand is that the longer the decay, the longer the note is going to be held for. Okay, and then I have a tune so I can set what this is going to be in hertz. And if you want, you can obviously pull up a frequency chart and find what key, or if you know what key you're working in for your song, you can make sure you can tune your kick drum appropriately. But for us, we're going to be working with our ears for the most part and not getting too bogged down into specific numbers. But obviously the higher I go, the higher the pitch. The lower I go, the lower the pitch. All right, so we'll just set it somewhere in the middle, and now we know how decay works. If I pull this all the way down, very short. If I pull it all the way up, a bit longer, right? We also have this little click parameter here, and this is a good one where the thing actually pops up and tells you. If you can't read this, it says, adds additional impact to the attack of the sound by doubling the pitch and reducing the decay for a short time. Okay, so maybe that's not all that helpful to us just to read it, but we can hear the difference, and basically all it's going to do is add a bit additional click and pop to the very, very top end, to the attack of the sound. So it's kind of like having, I don't know how to explain this, but it's kind of like using the transient designer in a lot of ways, and then maybe also throwing an EQ to boost somewhere in the top end to try to get a little bit of additional click and then a little more attack. But we can just turn it on and off and listen to the difference. So right there, you're not hearing too much of a difference, perhaps if we alter this tone. And what this device and this parameter is going to do is it's going to kind of shape the tone, again, similar to tune. But in my opinion, this sounds like it really shapes more that initial click of the sound. So even if you turn click off, there still is a click every single time based on how you set this tone. So if we go to the bottom, nothing. At the top, and maybe now if we add click, we actually will get some extra punch. So hopefully you can really hear the difference there. It's going to add more when we start to work with this pitch modulation. Okay, so what a kick drum is, especially a synthesized kick drum, is typically just like a sine wave with a really fast pitch envelope on it. And usually that is sloping down in some way. So we're starting at something very high and then quickly dropping it. Okay, so right now, let's start to add this in here. And right now, because our decay time is so fast, all it's doing is adding to that initial kick at the front, that initial little click noise. Okay, so if I pull this all the way up, it's going to actually be kind of jarring. But the more I increase this decay, the more you're going to actually start to hear a pitch modulation occurring, and it's going to follow this kind of a slope here. And now we're starting to get some laser type tones because the pitch modulation is so extreme. Okay, it's like 100 steps up. All right, but we can obviously put this down a little bit. And now we're starting to get some of those classic drum machine type sounds. And if I want something a little more dirty, I can start to pull this tune down. So something like that, and I can definitely hear that in my headphones. It's making my head shake a little bit. So really, that's basically it for the generation and the pitch mod. And of course, you can just kind of play with these different settings and see what you can get. Now, this is our first instance of working with something that's going to take information as MIDI. So let's go ahead and talk about that quickly. We're not going to go into too great of depth on MIDI editing and the like until the next section. But for now, I'll quickly walk you through it. So I'm going to create a new MIDI clip. I'll open it up. We have our piano roll here. And if I want to put in a note right now, we're going to hear it wherever I click. And if I want to turn that off, I can just click this little volume icon right here. And in this case, we're not actually key tracking anything. So if I make my note up here at C7, or I make it all the way down at C-2, it's exactly the same thing. So in that case, I'm going to go ahead and just fold this up. So it's just going to show us the notes we're using, and I'm only going to use this C2 now. All right, so now if I play this back, we got some 4 on the floor going, and now maybe we can adjust things. Okay, so that's sounding pretty cool. The other thing that we have control over is velocity sensitivity, and by default, this is routed to volume or approximate volume. So right now, if I play this back and I pull up on my velocity sensitivity, it's getting quieter, but only every hit is getting quieter. And why is that? Well, that's because our velocity isn't all the way up to 127. If I select velocity here, we can see that by default, I think it's probably in here around like 100. But if I want, I can change this and I could pull it. I'm going to turn this off again. All the way up to 127. I can turn this one way down, put this one here, put this one here. And now we're going to hear varying output level for each hit. And now if you want to turn down just how much of an impact that's having, and it tells you, it goes all the way up to 60 dB of lowest to highest. We can go somewhere in that range and we're sounding pretty good. The other cool thing is that we can map velocity to other parameters. So for example, if I want the harder hits to ring out a little bit longer, I could take velocity, turn decay down a little bit, and go ahead and route that up. And now let's hear what happens. Now we can get more of an extreme if we change these settings. Let's go in here and really crank it up so you can hear. Go ahead and clear that. Turn the velocity sensitivity up even higher. And this is going to be interesting. We could also maybe adjust the pitch mod. Maybe we'll do that the opposite way. So just like that, we're able to control all sorts of things with our velocity right there. So that's a lot of fun. That's really cool. Gain is actually not going to have any effect at this point because we're just working through MIDI, and because this particular instrument doesn't allow us to make any of these changes. So if I go in here and play back, that's obviously having no effect. We have a pan control. And that has obviously caused a serious glitch, but it should work normally. Hopefully if I pull all this back, we're not going to just have that same problem. Okay, cool. And then there's also a timbre control as well. One other point to mention here with the E-kick is that if I change the duration on this note, it's not going to make a difference, okay? So that also isn't necessarily routed to anything within the device itself. I can make this as long as I wanted or as short as I wanted. Let's turn the decay way down so we can... Okay, so this is a good example how even though my note is being held for a really long time, we're only getting what's popping out here of the instrument itself. Okay, so that's really the kick at its most basic level. Where things start to get interesting is when you start to add effects into the instrument itself. The first question you might have, and I'm just going to start this over here. The first question you might have is, what's the difference between processing on the outside and on the inside? Honestly, there really is no difference. The only thing that's going to make a big difference is if you load stuff up here into the effects and then you go ahead and save. Okay, so that way it will save all of the effects with it as compared to putting on some kind of crazy effects chain after the fact. You can't obviously save that all into the E-kick. So what you'd have to do is drag and drop your effects here inside of that particular area so you could have that nestled and you'd be good to go. So what we saw were a few of these presets had some effects already layered inside, and you can take this as far as you want. And don't forget, you could also even do something crazy like drop an LFO in here, and inside of that LFO you could drop a FX layer. And inside of that FX layer, you could have multiple parallel chains going, and inside one of those chains, you could do a multi-band effect. Again, I mean, your head can swim with possibilities here, and this is why I think Bitwig's instruments are not super complex. They're not super deep. It's because you can go so deep with everything else already. And that's what I'm going to kind of encourage you guys to do. So let's see what we can do with this guy real quick. I'm just going to start with something blank, and I'm going to play this back and see if we can get some really weird sounds out of this. And right now I'm just kind of messing around, seeing, can I make something that sounds absolutely nothing like a traditional kick drum? Because all of our presets were kick drums. So we know it's good at doing that, but what else is this thing capable of? So right now I'm looking for Transient Control. Okay, let's see. What do I want to do? Let's take our multi-band. Okay, let's see. What else do we want to add in here? Maybe a chorus. Okay, let's see. What else do we want to do? We're not getting a whole lot of low end here. Yeah, using the multi-band wasn't the best idea because obviously there's not a whole lot of low-end content going on. But what I want you guys to recognize and see is that if you use a little bit of imagination and you stretch your limits beyond just reading what the title is, you can get some really crazy sounds to come out of this thing. And the other day I was messing around and was able to come up with some pretty wacky stuff. And then, of course, you can always take this a step further, create an audio track and take that input to be from the e-kick post fader or something, and then you could record in some of these sounds that are coming out if you wanted to do that. Right, and now we could take this sound and we could go in here, and now we could start to adjust pitch and stuff if we wanted. And then also go in there and maybe do some additional things on top of that. So the sky's the limit with this particular effect, and it really is just a matter of being creative and not being held to any sort of parameter or the title of the synthesizer itself. The last thing I want to show you guys just quickly with the e-kick, it's one thing I forgot to show you, is if I pull this on here and I go into the effects, one thing I can do is I can use something like the ladder, which has a ADSR controller on it, attack, decay, sustain, release. And if I use this and I play notes in, sorry about that. I can actually use this Adsr envelope, which I wasn't able to do before. So this is going to be a little bit trickier to get dialed in exactly like what you want, but you can use this thing. I had used it as well earlier when I was messing around, and I was able to get some pretty cool results using that Adsr envelope, which again, when you see blinking yellow lights and I click and you can see that yellow light coming through here, that lets us know that since this is a MIDI instrument and since this Adsr is taking its input from MIDI, we can actually use that and do some creative and interesting things with it as well. So that's going to do it for my explanation on the e-kick. You really need to get in there now and mess around a little bit and try layering up some different effects and see what you're able to come up with. Again, there are some great presets in here, but don't feel like you're limited to only making kick drums, and that's going to become ever more apparent in the next video. So thank you for watching, and you'll hear from me again then. Take care.